evening. Welcome. My name is Louise Kelly, and I'm the chair of the San Diego IMERIT, which is one of the groups that helped to bring this event about. And it's my great pleasure to launch this event tonight and introduce it. And I wanted to just real briefly just tell you a little bit about San Diego IMERIT, or IMERIT in general, what we do. IMERIT is a system-wide program that we have throughout the Alliant International University. How many campuses do we have? I think 7. 6 in California and in Mexico City, and then 2 overseas. We are committed to internationalism and multiculturalism, and those were 2 legacies from our founding institutions, which was CSPP and USIU. And so we're trying to do something very different here at Alliant, and many of you are Alliant students, faculty, and staff, and you know about that, and some of you are joining us for the first time tonight. So we do a series of events throughout the year, and we're committed to, IMERIT stands for International Multicultural Education, Research, Intervention, and Training. So we deal with provocative issues, we're committed to diversity, we're committed to education, we're committed to connecting with the communities and different communities. And this event is very special for us because this is the LGBT community has been a community that IMERIT has wanted to get more integrated and support, and it's taken a while. You know, you got to get the members on the team, etc. So I'm very delighted to be here tonight. I really look forward to the panelists and to their stories, and I would like to introduce Matt Porter, who is one of the instigators of this whole event tonight. So let's give Matt a hand.
Thanks, Louise. It's such a pleasure to be here, and it's so great to see such a wonderful turnout. It's not a pleasant evening to get out of the house if you were feeling cozy at home. You had to get out of there and into a little bit of cold and rain to get here. But anyway, I actually want to start by thanking my colleague Tina Moncada. Tina, if you can make yourself known. Tina and I have been working for several months on this event, and she's really kept me in line in those moments when I've tended to veer or lose focus, and has been really an indispensable component of this whole event coming together, and also the other organizers. So we had 2 student volunteers that have been very, very active. So Nicole Graves, if you can stand up, are you in here? Nicole's the interim president of the recently growing what we call the San Diego Rockaway Queer Alliance, which is the gay and lesbian student group here at Alliant in San Diego. She's been very active on this event, and also Natalie Blake. Natalie, are you here? Can you wave? She's in the library. Actually, she's doing something for me. So Natalie, I'll get her to stand up towards the end. So now, I recognize that not everyone here is a psychologist, a professional psychologist, or even a student of psychology. And this event really is interdisciplinary, and everyone's a welcome, both from inside the university and outside the university. However, one of the aims of this event is to introduce to the psychologists, students of psychology who are here, a particular subspecialty within psychology, and that can be, it can really lend itself to new ways of conceptualizing mental health and also mental disorders. So that is called, one of the names for that. Actually, there are various names, but one of the names is critical psychology. So this talk is meant to sort of introduce you to, my thinking and just general thinking, what literature has to say is about critical psychology. What is it? Why is it being so critical, etc.? What is it criticizing? So first of all, I will say that it's a bit of an unfortunate name because it's not necessarily a negative thing at all. It tends to be in its application more positive, and it has concrete applications for clinical psychologists. So, so those of you who are not clinical psychologists and who are not interested in clinical psychology, I ask you to bear with me for the next 15 minutes. So anyway, first of all, just a little bit of background. I actually was a UN peacekeeper myself, so a civilian UN peacekeeper in the former Yugoslavia in 1996 and 97, so right after the Dayton Peace Accords were signed and several years before Kosovo sort of exploded. So when I was there, I did two things that led to the interests that, from which this project and others have emerged. So one was that I went back into the closet after having been out for 8 years in New York City, where I've moved to recently, where I've moved from recently to come here, because of implicit environmental pressures to conform to unstated social norms. And the other thing that I did was that I lived in a refugee community. So a Serbian refugee community. Those experiences together laid the groundwork for my ongoing interest in psychological resilience and its relationship with sociocultural factors. So the relationship between resilience and well-being, self-esteem, and sociocultural factors is really the heart of critical psychology. So a brief primer on critical psychology. By and large, clinical psychology, and by this I am referring to a wide range of approaches, ranging from cognitive to behavioral to psychoanalytic, existential, humanistic, etc. All of those approaches often understand the source of emotional or psychological difficulties as being in the head. Now, there's obviously much empirical and theoretical appeal to this. In fact, one of the theorists that has been very influential in my own work, Hans Selye, famously said that the stress effect lies not so much in the event itself, but in how we take it. So clearly, clearly our personal internal reactions to external life events and environmental constraints mediate the stress response. Yet, it is impossible, and fortunately unnecessary, to ignore the mounting evidence that individual psychology is importantly embedded in multiple contexts. And those contexts include certainly family systems, other social systems, as well as larger sociocultural contexts. And the larger sociocultural contexts are really the focus of critical psychology, as you'll see in a moment. With those layers of context, individual psychology shares reciprocally causal relationships. So individual psychology influences the layers of context, and the layers of context influence the individual psychology. Now, as this evidence has amassed, we have seen within psychology as a whole the growth of various explanatory models of human psychological functioning as inextricably embedded within these layers of macro contexts. These explanatory models have emerged across a wide range of traditional psychological subspecialties and paradigms as diverse as cognitive and psychoanalytic. So for the psychologists and psychology students who are here, think back to Lev Vygotsky, and then fast forward to Gregory Bateson, ideas about the extended mind, Russian activity theorists. I think I saw some of my students here, sound familiar to them. Then zoom all the way across to the other end of the theoretical territory and consider Slavoj Žižek's application of Lacanian psychoanalysis to cultural institutions and the impact of Foucault's critical theory on both psychiatry and psychoanalysis. So more particularly relevant to our work as professional psychologists and professional psychologists in training is that within clinical psychology have developed various models of mental health that see an individual's psychological difficulties or well-being as arising due to the influence of an inharmonious system within which the individual is embedded. Clinical interventions have been developed on the basis of those models, and those interventions focus typically on treating the system itself with the hope that improvements in the system will entrain benefits for the individuals as well as the collective. So very popular here at Alliant and on the West Coast in general is the family systems therapy of Murray Bowen. And in New York, where I'm from, we talk a lot about structural family therapy of Salvador Minuchin. And in both of those, the family system is treated by the psychologist. So now where family systems approaches look at the immediate family system, critical psychology, as articulated by Charles Tolman and importantly and recently by Prilatensky and Fox, conceptualizes a larger system, and by that I'm referring to hegemonic sociocultural institutions, as an important object of treatment, as well as the individual and her relationship to the institution. So what is it, anyway, that critical psychology is criticizing? It's criticizing two things, in fact. Critical psychology is criticizing clinical psychology's often heady, individualistic focus, which it sees as a bias. And on the other thing is that it criticizes the social institutions themselves, overt or covert, that implicitly or explicitly engender human suffering. And the essential radical claim of critical psychology is that if we as psychologists truly care about human well-being and the reduction of suffering, we are ethically bound to adopt a social change stance. And with this, critical psychology shares much in common with the liberation psychology of the Salvadorian Martín Baró and the conscientização of Paulo Freire, a Brazilian pedagogist. So I'm going to diverge to particulars for a moment and then give some concrete recommendations and then wrap up, because the point of this really is to hear people's stories, not to listen to a lecture. So despite my own inclinations. In my own research on wartime stress and resilience, my former mentor and colleague Nicholas Haslam at the University of Melbourne and I found that socioeconomic and sociocultural constraints predicted approximately 1/3 of the variance in refugee mental health beyond the presumably traumatic effects of the acute stress of war. And that was in a meta-analysis that synthesized data on more than 60,000 primary study participants. So those results are fairly robust. This line of thinking and those results in particular raise the question, might not enduring sociocultural vectors exert an influence on the psychological well-being of our troops, particularly post-deployment? For example, since we know that social isolation can be a risk factor for the development of PTSD, ought we not then investigate the hypothesis that don't ask, don't tell may increase certain forms of social isolation, thereby placing LGBTQ-identified troops potentially at greater risk for post-combat psychological suffering? Just a hypothesis. Now, these understandings that have found their way from critical theory, which actually was a type of literary theory, all the way into critical psychology, don't necessarily mean that all therapists need to immediately change what they're doing, drop what they're doing, and become explicit social activists. But the therapy itself can reflect the understandings. In fact, the corrective measure, according to Fox and Pilotensky, can simply be to create a space within the talk therapy wherein the individual begins to interrogate the hegemonic contexts within which her psychology is embedded. I'll get slightly more concrete here, as promised, and when I do, many of you may find that you already include elements of critical psychology within your clinical work. So what Fox and Pilotensky recommend in their writing is that therapists begin to do several things differently in their clinical work. And these are not only tools, I will add, that you can consider bringing into your work, but also reference points we can use to anchor our way of listening to the presentations that we will hear tonight. So the three most concrete, easy to remember suggestions that I hope you all carry home with you and consider using in your practice are, first, to begin to use therapy to locate the disturbance, at least partially, in the sociocultural context, rather than exclusively pathologizing personal psychology. This will sometimes involve a discursive shift towards framing the challenging thoughts, emotions, and behaviors as understandable in light of the sociocultural difficulties facing the patient. Second, to facilitate the patient's formulation of interpersonal connections with others who share the same sociocultural struggles. This can help the patient achieve a sense of contextually meaningful solidarity and social support. And the third general suggestion is to facilitate the patient's adoption of a social change stance, and perhaps even a personal exploration of concrete activism possibilities. All these three goals, these also can become then goals that you would write into a treatment plan depending on the appropriateness for patients. So these can be concretized in your paperwork and in your practice. But these three work together when appropriate to create a sense of empowerment, sense of accomplishment, and maybe even some real relief from some of the actual injustice if change actually happens as a result of behavior that a patient is able to instantiate on the basis of the therapy work. So an additional wrinkle, though, is that critical psychology radically sees the hierarchy that is definitional to the therapist-patient relationship as reifying the political, social, and psychological disenfranchisement of the help seeker, thereby implicitly keeping the help seeker oppressed. This process is thought to occur regardless of what other helpful processes may be taking place concurrently in the therapy. Here, the corrective measure may partially lie in the therapist's own personal disclosure regarding the impact of relevant sociocultural variables. So in a truly critical psychology, the sessions can get real very quickly. Therapists who are located within different sociocultural strata from their patient can allow themselves to learn about the relevant sociocultural issues from their patient. Then, in the therapist's own demonstration of real learning, she can facilitate the patient's appreciation of the potential for self-empowerment that's inherent in a social change stance. On the other hand, when the therapist and patient share the same sociocultural struggles, therapist disclosure can be helpful in facilitating a sense of solidarity and engagement for the patient. So how to do this? One simply expands what one listens to, primarily. Expanding attention in order to understand wider circles of context, listening to stories with a particular ear towards how social institutions may shape and impact personal difficulties, appreciating the complexities of personal coping responses, and engaging with one's own relationship as a therapist with the social institutions and their sequelae. So that, my friends, is what we hope to get a glimpse of tonight with the generous assistance of our panel of speakers. Our evening's trajectory will include elements of educating ourselves, listening to stories that do sit at the juncture of the personal and the political, and then particularly toward the end of the evening, engaging dynamically and authentically with that juncture. All these activities will take place within a framework of cultural education and critique, which is inherently a social change stance. So I do want to applaud everyone who's in attendance tonight in this room, and anybody who may be in the overflow room. Just by being here tonight, we're showing our willingness to consider the psychological impact of social policy.